welcome to the latest episode of the Land Blast podcast. We're here with Chris Martin, and we have Marshall Seedorff with us today. We're going to chat about everything under the sun. How are you?
I'm doing awesome. I'm excited to be here with you guys.
Likewise, it's been a long time coming. Well, we kind of wanted to just introduce who you were and how you came to meet us knuckleheads and what our adventure was like. And, I won't say rarely, but we don't get to have those 2-year client relationships where you start building a relationship even stronger than just what the property search is. But we had a lot of fun looking at a ton of different properties. And, I don't know that we ever really talked about how the focus came to be like on the Applegate River. I know you and Chris initially met. How did that come to be? Like,
well,
what put you in front of us?
How did you and your wife decide Southern Oregon was where you wanted to move to? You guys came from Texas.
We moved from Texas.
Before that, you grew up in
Georgia. Yeah, my wife and I are both born and raised in north of Atlanta.
Okay.
So kind of crazy if you think about the juxtaposition growing up in the South to ending up in
Oregon.
South of Oregon.
Yeah, no kidding.
It's a very different place.
Yeah.
Very thick culture to a melting pot of all kinds of different things.
Yeah. So, to answer your question, we've always loved the West.
Mm-hmm.
We love Texas. There was a lot of great things about Texas, a lot of good people, a lot of friends. Culture of Texas, I think, is really unique and very fun to be a part of. But when we got married, we've always been drawn to the West. We love the mountains, the big open spaces, the clean rivers, the public land, the hike and fish and hunt and camp and do all those things kind of untethered.
So pretty much all the reasons we focus on this sector of real estate.
Exactly. Yeah, which I'll get to how we discovered each other, but that was very obvious to me from afar. But so we knew, even when we started dating, we wanted to end up in the West. And we loved Texas. It was great for us professionally for a long time. But then we had kids and we were like, okay, well, if we're going to move to the West, she's got family still in Georgia and I've got family all in Northern California now. So it's moving to Montana isn't much closer to family than Texas. In fact, it might be further away because the logistics of getting there is tough. And so we were like, there's beautiful places to be found. We ought to, start driving distance of family in Northern California. And so Idaho, Nevada, Southern Oregon. We hadn't ever been to Southern Oregon before. And so we kind of decided a long time ago, even really before we started our property search, hey, let's take family vacations or you and I trips to places that we might want to live. Even just theoretically, let's go out there. And so
this was approximately 2018?
Yeah, ish. Yeah, we had had our first child in 2019. So I think that's when the draw to this specific area and being closer to family became more apparent to us. But we'd come on a hunting trip out to Eastern Oregon and discovered how beautiful parts of Eastern Oregon were.
Well, you went to the Eagle Caps, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I don't like to tell people what mountain it was because I got to keep it a secret.
Sorry.
Yeah, Idaho. But no, I think on a subsequent, to tell a direct story, I'd been looking at properties online, Lands of America type thing. And I found a specific property in the Sams Valley. And I was like, man, that looks really beautiful. There's pictures of elk on this property. It looks, being close to an airport's important to me. And I looked up Medford Airport. I was like, oh, there's an airport there. It's close to Medford.
It's international.
I think you were either the listing agent on that property or were somehow involved in the deal.
I think I was a listing agent.
And so I went to your page and I saw, Christian values were very forward. You talked about your specialty being rural land, real estate. And I was like, man, this is exactly what I'm looking for. I want to do business with people who are Christians and share the values that I believe in, because that says a lot about how you're hopefully going to conduct yourself professionally.
Hopefully.
Yeah. And your specialty is exactly what we're looking for. We want it's kind of popularized a homestead lifestyle, but we were just looking for land and opportunity to be close to adventure and have a little bit of space, and that was what you were talking about. So
well, the property you called on is the one I should have bought. I kick myself for not having bought that property. That's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah. So I think we booked a trip, a vacation to Oregon where we were looking at, I think, Prineville for a while.
Yeah. I think I even pushed you over in that direction to say, hey, check out these 2 areas based on what you described.
I think you did.
Central Oregon, Southern Oregon, like one of those is going to be home.
Yeah, so we flew to Portland, we drove to Bend, we spent like 3 days in Bend, did an awesome fishing trip, just kind of self-guided on the Deschutes and some of the little rivers around there. Went out to Prineville, checked it out, and then we drove down here. We had lunch with you, had pizza.
Yeah, Kaleidoscope.
Yep.
Yeah.
I drove past it this morning. I was like, oh, that's where that is. And then we went fishing here, and I caught a steelhead, and we had an awesome day on the river. And it was just the lunch with you. Honestly, felt more like an interview of us than anything, which I think was really. It showed me a lot about you as like you're trying to like sluice out like, are we serious, or what are your motivations? Like, what are you interested in? It was like a very thorough conversation that I really appreciated because it helped us explore what we were really looking for. And then you pointed us in a couple directions. You're like, go check out this area, go cruise 238 between, Medford and Grants Pass. We like these couple areas. And to make a long story short, we, took your advice and, drove over 238 in the Applegate Valley, and it was just like the clouds parted. It was a beautiful day. And we were like, oh my goodness, this is absolutely beautiful. And we're only, a short drive back to town. And we kind of fell in love with it immediately and, loved the little town of Jacksonville, got to know Grants Pass and, discovered it had a lot to offer too. And so we really made the decision on that trip. It was like, I think this is where we want to be. And then we started talking about what it is that we wanted. And, it was really important to us for a lot of reasons that we wanted to have access to good water. So being on the river was a huge priority. And then kind of the balance between what you can afford and what you want was the battle of many years.
Seeing things come and go, and it being just out of reach, or not being enough.
Well, from my perspective, and we talked a couple times after that, but from my perspective, I heard what you were looking for, and I instantly went, ooh, I've seen that property a couple times, but this is going to be a challenge to get all those things put together, and I know how that in the Applegate, like it's a labor to find those opportunities. And at that point, I'm not gonna lie, I don't like making cold calls, and I don't really like some of that search part of the process, but we got a guy on the team who loves making those uncomfortable phone calls. And I was like, hey Alex, I think I'm gonna need some help on this one, because I think this is someone we really want to work with, but it's going to take some extra effort to find that property. So,
well, and from my perspective, I'll just add some color to that, because you bumped us over to Alex, and I was like, here we go. I'm getting like the B team. He like doesn't think we're serious. This is gonna be too much effort. So I get what's happening here. But all right, I get it. But then I met Alex for the first time, and I was like, no, I got like the perfect, like this person that's I was only just getting to know. Was like, this is really cool, and we just connected immediately.
It was a lot of
in
fun.
a really cool way. Like it was, I don't know. You probably feel the same way,
It
but
made the work easy. Yeah, no, for sure. It's it was really fun to like take your guys' dream and image and be like, okay, this is just mine for the moment, and I'm gonna go find my property. I'm gonna imagine like I'm finding my property. That instant connection was for sure there.
Yeah, and I felt like we were like kind of like friends in it too. Like it was a weird thing where it was like I enjoyed calling Alex to talk about things. We ended up talking about like, how's his family doing? What are you up to?
No, it was a really cool experience. It was, I cherished that time. Glad it took us 2 years to find the right spot, but well, it turns out Marshall's better at getting in front of people in the Applegate than I am, to be honest. We pinpointed a bunch of properties on the map. I had this thing and laminated maps. I knew every property I was going to go get to, and then he calls me and goes, hey, I'm having lunch with so-and-so. I'm like, what? I don't even get on the property. It's like, I just called him up and we're going to go meet. Okay, well, I don't know what you need me for. Let's find this thing together. So it was kind of cool. Do you still talk with John and what's his brother's name?
Michael Staver's actually become a really good friend, if that's what you're thinking about. Yeah, because his family has a bunch of beautiful property out there, and was one of the first people I reached out to. Was like, oh man, I mean, at the very least, they at least know what's going on.
Yeah, there's either a chunk or they know someone with a chunk.
Yeah, and so And in those, you guys probably could speak to this better than I can, but in those kind of small communities, it feels like, I mean, from afar, I was honestly getting a little frustrated because I was like, you find out about a deal because it hit the MLS after it closed, you know, or hit Zillow or whatever, and you'd see the deal got done. But I was like, dude, I would have loved that property. Like, what happened? Alex was like, dude, it never hit the market. So we were, you know, quickly realized it was going to take some kind of proactiveness to.
Yeah. It was fun. I mean, I had to learn new tactics, and it went from, it didn't just include cold calls. It was, you know, talking to, there's a broker that lives out there. So I called her. I was like, okay, you know people. And then I just looked at anybody that sold, you know, any of the ranches out there in the past. And I can only call Chris so many times. But, you know, making those relationships, like, hey, you hear anything, you let me know. But, I mean, as we've joked about, the funny thing was that probably 2 years prior, at least a year and a half, Chris and I walked onto your property before it was even on the market.
And I had been there once before that. So
it's true to your point. Like,
you bought it for $1 million less, I think, than it was originally advertised at during the cannabis boom.
Yeah. But it's so true to your point as far as, you know, those specialty properties don't always trade on the market. They you know who the buyer is before you even head to the market, you know.
So the process, I'm sure there were some low points, you know, you're talking about. What's it like now that it's come full circle and the dream has become a reality? What's that experience like? Because I think a lot of us go through life in many ways without ever getting some of those mountaintop experiences, you know, where you got to have a big mountaintop high experience with that coming full circle. What was that like?
So I think like the mountaintop experience is just like seeing faith in God in the process, like manifest itself in ways that we could have never imagined that it would have, right? Like I think to Alex's great credit, like we were kind of pushing to buy some properties that were, you know, way less attractive ultimately than where we ended up.
They went from having an old barn, or we went from living in a barn to having an old barn on their property. Yeah.
Oh, I know that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Well, and we were ready and excited to like probably spend too much money, and Alex was like, look, man, I respect you. Ultimately, if you decide this is what you want to do, I'm not going to stand in your way, but in good faith, I can't let you do this without at least having this conversation. I was like, you know what, I really respect that, and I'm going to do my best to try to listen to your advice because you're an expert.
Yeah.
And we're not going to pay what they're asking.
Yeah. And it was tough because when we started, we really committed to each other, to our family. Sammy and I did that. Like, we're in this for the long haul. Mm-hmm. Like, we don't want to make a mistake. We don't want to jump into something we're going to regret just because we want to force something to happen. Like, I feel like in life, when you're trying to force something to happen, it's not God's will, it's your will that you're trying to impose. Mm-hmm. And I feel like at the times in my life where I've really like listened to God and trying to see where He's moving and where doors are opening, and I'm not just forcing and running through it, it's like good things happen. And so like trying to be faithful in that process of having that long-term mindset, like it ultimately paid off, but it was not easy. I mean, there were times I think I was probably borderline annoying Alex of being like, dude, we're ready to make this move. Like, the property's not there, but like, you know, I'm ready to start packing the truck.
For sure. You talk about being, I'll summarize my version of what I heard there was being patient and waiting on God to allow the timing, not running out in front of God's will. First off, and maybe it's shame on me. I think we talked for a minute about faith when we got together at our lunch, but I think after, you know, we connected after you purchased and we were talking about a few different things, I didn't realize how much of a pillar that was in your life. And I was like, oh wow, it's really cool because we get all walks of life walk through the doors, as you can imagine, here from, how do I say it? Seasons of life. You have people in a season of life, you know, at retirement age, downsizing. We have people in a season of life, you know, where they're retiring or semi-retiring from their company. What we don't see a lot is this younger generation, our own generation, able to make that step towards a ranch ownership or, you know, a significant property ownership. And it's really cool to not only see you able to do it, but to see you do it in a way that you have peace about. You know, it's like you're not taking on a payment, or you're not taking on a debt, or you're not taking on these different things that you haven't been like, no, I have peace about this. I'm moving forward. I have a plan. I have things in place, and that's really cool. I've seen some younger folks stretch beyond their limit. It's been something I've tried to avoid like crazy in my life, to run out in front of peace. I don't want to outrun the peace I have in life. And I think that's just super cool that you were able to accomplish something that's a mountaintop experience without losing that peace that comes with saying, Lord, it's in your hands, not necessarily mine. That's awesome. I compliment you guys.
Thank you. Yeah, and Alex and I got in the weeds through the process about like what my comfort zone was and how far.
That, like those circumstances, a lot of people get into those because of impulse, right? Mm-hmm. But like when we got to those points where it felt like the vice was tightening, like you had the wherewithal to know that we got into this process for the right reasons, and that what's on the other side is the right thing. Like it wasn't like it was just this shiny object that you had to get to, but it was like, hey, we've already decided and we know that this is the plan. We're being hit with these obstacles and it's going to take something to get over them. But I mean, you were willing to make tough decisions pretty quickly, selling cars, eliminating that one thing. We're just going to drive across country. Like there were some moments where it's like, man, is this going to come?
No, you were probably the most committed to the process buyer we've worked with in a long time, from start to finish, between the search for the property to once you found the property you wanted. Like that was pretty cool to see. That's a compliment, but also makes it easier for us to go to work.
Well, yeah. When we talked about about seasons, we enjoy working with all of our clients. We have good relationships with many of them, but I think what I latched onto with you was you had two girls, I had two boys, we're like the same age, and I was like, man, like this is I can very easily put myself in your shoes and be like, man, what are we doing? How are we going to do this? Let's get this done. Like it was a really cool experience because we don't get to see that very often. Mm-hmm. Like I don't expect I'll be your neighbor anytime soon.
I hope you are.
We'll see.
I'm going to start recruiting both of you guys.
Caleb called me this morning, so maybe there's an opportunity.
Anyway, but so now that you're here in Southern Oregon, just talk to me about like from Texas to here. What's that been like?
Yeah, it's interesting. We were actually talking about it in the fellowship group this morning a little bit, and it stemmed from a conversation I had yesterday. But I think one of the things about Texas that's different is it's a conservative state. Faith is kind of like ingrained in the culture, but it's almost like taken for granted that that's like a shared value. And one of the things that's kind of surprised me about living here that I actually really like is like the way I described it yesterday. I don't know if I like that long term, but it's on my mind right now. But I feel like the people who are committed to that lifestyle here, it's like a rebel with a cause mentality of like, hey, there's a battle going on that we're very aware of. There are forces at play here trying to do things that we don't agree with, and we're going to lock arms and,
Well, I think the collective room this morning when you said that and you and Randall were talking, like you could see the whole room go, like it is something that is exciting to get to be a part of.
Yeah, and there's kind of like this revival, right? And even the community we moved into in the Applegate and the church that we joined is going through this really exciting kind of rebuilding revival time. Mm-hmm. And on the business side of my life, like that's kind of always been what I've sought after is like the startups, the building something phase is really exciting to me, and like being a part of a community that's going through that and trying to like lean in and figure out like what is important to us, like what are the values that we're going to die on that hill. I think that's
my wife and I have had many of those conversations about the difference between things that we feel like are injustice or not right versus things we are convicted to stand up on against, and then things we're willing to die on the hill of. Like there's a whole lane over here that we're like, like I don't like it, I'm going to vote against it, but I'm not called to step out and do anything in that lane. There's things we're 100% called to step out and do battle on, which is kind of a narrow lane of things I think that we get called into. And then there's other things where we're like, well, if that happens, it is what it is. Here we go. Like it's time to put your armor on, or whatever that looks like, whether that's a spiritual battle or whether that's a legal battle or heaven forbid it's a physical altercation. But anyway, I don't know. I get a lot of peace with knowing lanes. You'll hear me use the word lanes all the time.
Yeah. Well, just knowing where your conviction lies and what is really the most important thing. picking those hills, right? Proactively, so you don't fall into the battle, like, the wrong battle.
Yeah, no. Starting with a firm foundation. Anyway, we could go on and on this one.
Yeah.
What was your draw to the Applegate Fellowship?
Honestly, the venue first off. I think when we went on that first trip out to the Applegate, the beauty of the area struck us, and then we're like, okay, well, specifically with our relationship with my wife and our family, like there's a couple things that are really important. Number one is a good church community. Number two is a good fitness community. For us personally, and then now that we have kids, it's also like, okay, the school community is becoming more and more important. But the church, was the first place we went to just to try to figure out, like, okay, we like this area, it's pretty, but could we actually live here? So we walked in a very interesting time looking back at the church, where it was going through this, kind of huge shakeup, but the venue is just incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, we walked into this outdoor amphitheater at a summertime, Sunday sermon, and the weather's amazing, the venue's incredible, and then the young pastor who got up on stage was just an incredible Bible teacher, and just very real, and very humble, which is probably what I look for the most in a pastor is just humility, right? And so that was striking, and it was a very small church in that time, very few people there. And so the part that kind of really took it to the next level is the pastor, they do a Sunday barbecue in the summers to encourage people to hang out and have community with each other. And afterwards, the pastor walked up and just stuck his hand out and introduced himself to me and asked me why I was there.
That's cool.
And I was like, well, this is really cool, and let me tell you about that. And I'd been on a warpath, if you will, to find a property. So like once every 6 months I was coming out here to look at properties with Alex, and I told him that, and he was like, well, next time you come out here, why don't we make time and we can get coffee and get to know each other.
Yeah, that's cool.
And so on the next trip, I came out and had coffee with him and just got to know him as a person, and got to know where he wanted to take the church and what he wanted to see happen with the community, and it was just aligned with my values. And he's quickly become a friend, and
That's awesome.
that community that they're building out there is just really special. So we feel really blessed to have found a place so beautiful that also had a great community like that.
Yeah, the community aspect of like the I'll call it the brotherhood or the fellowship community is probably the single biggest reason, even above business, that I would struggle to leave this area. Just that band of brothers conversation, like the people who I know my kids get to be around, the people who I know is pouring into my wife when I'm not around, or my kids or whatever, like just that comfort and that security of knowing that it is, men and families that I respect and who genuinely care about me, in many cases probably more than they're the selflessness of those relationships. And like you said, this guy, humility. That's the thing that stood out to you. I think one of the things I look for, first off, for example, if I'm interviewing someone to come to work, are they selfish or selfless? Like, which direction do they lean? And, obviously in sales, a lot of people have a tendency to be selfish in the sales world. So finding people who are selfless in this industry, but then also looking at it and going, okay, well, what am I looking for, for my kids to be around? What am I looking for to plug into for fellowship? What am I looking for in mentors? What am I looking for? And so much of it comes back to that humility or that selfish, selfless kind of conversation.
Yeah, and that was one of our biggest fears leaving Texas, because we weren't leaving a bad situation at all. We had great friends, we had a great church community, we had great social network there, great business network. And so one of my biggest kind of like, are we doing the right thing questions is like, are we going to be able to find something like that out here? And so, I mean, even sitting here now,
Reset button on your whole community.
yeah,
Yeah, that's a huge risk.
yeah, and with a family and a wife, you think about their relationships and all of that. And I think finding the right church with the right community really kind of made it feel like it was, something we were really willing to lean into.
So I think that leads to, I think, in your core, kind of core values, which we'll have a part B on this, but as a teaser, core values I hear you talking about your faith, your family, and then the outdoors.
Absolutely.
Which is basically what I share as core values for if someone says, hey, what's important to you? Like, I share those things. And one of the coolest things about this job is, we get to see a lot of people who share that same general, faith, family, outdoors, core values. The unique thing, I think, and what makes it cool with you is most of those people are 20 years older than you. And so it's like there's a disconnect. You've heard the sympathy and empathy kind of conversations when you have sympathy or connect with someone who's going through a different season you've never been through. And you can kind of picture it. Well, I've never been through selling my business and retiring early or retiring or any of those things. So I can understand from the outside what a lot of our clients are going through in this monumental season of going from a city lot to 50 acres or 20 acres, or going from a big business to buying a ranch as part of the business sale or whatever that might be. Working with, this or similar seasoned demographic of folks who, as we are, I get more excited. It's easier for me because I'm going through the same season.
Super relatable.
Yeah.
And that's so much fun. But I think that's the biggest thing with outdoor property group, like just the whole branding message that we're doing allows us to meet people like you, and then get to call people like you friends and brothers and all those things afterwards, and then those relationships last for years and years, and it's a blessing.
Well, to lead into the outdoors thing, what I found really cool, and as we all know, I'm in my infancy of hunting and all of that. So like hearing your stories was super cool. But like when you think of Texas, you think, oh, Texas, like that's the Wild West, like that's you're in it. But then you're like, no, like I'm moving there so I can come get your hunting. Like you've got it the best. So that was a huge draw for you too, was getting out. And I know we shushed on the wilderness area, but coming out and getting to hunt elk in your backyard is a huge deal for you. So like how long or how much has hunting been part of who Marshall is?
Most of my life. I think I had an uncle that was really influential in introducing hunting to me in the right way from a true conservation perspective. I mean, he's really into waterfowl hunting, but he's also probably the biggest bird nerd that I know. And so, when you go hunting with someone like that who's telling you about everything around you, and that's your first experience, and you get the full picture. It's not just we're going out to kill a duck. It's like, hey, I'm going to go show you this whole ecosystem and how this works. And you can kind of take that whole experience away from it, not just a dead duck. Mm-hmm. And so I think I really appreciate that was my entry into it, because I don't think that's how a lot of people get into it. Or maybe, I think hunting has a huge marketing problem, so I think that's not how people see it. But, I think from a very young age, I was very drawn to the outdoors. And then as I grew older and got into athletics, like the idea of like going farther and hunting harder was like very appealing. Of doing like these backcountry trips and having this like hiking fitness element to it, kind of like combines everything that I care about, right? Like this pursuit of something that's hard, the adventure.
Especially proving the stereotype of beer can shooting. That's not what it is. It's a whole experience and very much involved in the fitness circle of your life.
Well, you said the word there a couple times, and you said it as well, experience. It's not a trophy. You're going after an experience. Yes, there's an element of success, harvest, trophy, challenge tied up in it. But I'd say if anybody looked at my bank records and said, how much was your price spent per pound of harvested wild game meat? They'd be like, you are a terrible business person. Yeah. Like lousy. But if you compared that to what the average person spends on vacations each year, they'd be like, oh, well, that's a perfectly normal line item. Yeah. And I came home with some meat, and I came home with some experience, and I came home 5 pounds lighter, and whatever that is.
Experience and adventure.
Yes.
Like adventure is something that, like true adventure, I think is hard to find. And I think a lot of people kind of err on the side of like cheap thrills, I call them. Like the comparison, like a roller coaster ride. It's fun. It's like 2 minutes of fun, and then you're like kind of seeking the next fun thing. But like true adventure like really scratches that itch. And I think one of the reasons I care so much about conservation and the work that I do professionally is like trying to protect that opportunity for true adventure for my kids, their grandkids, and like experience of like that ecosystem, right? So I don't know, kind of gets into a larger philosophical conversation, but
it's not one that we don't have semi-frequently.
Well, before we let you off of here, your work, your business.
Yeah, I'm in the meat business. Well, I've been in the food business my entire career. And right now I help run the sales team for a meat company that focuses on regeneratively raised proteins, mostly beef and bison, raised basically with respect to how nature would have, historically.
So describe, for those who don't know, describe briefly what regenerative means.
I like
If
to
you
say-
can.
Yeah, no,
Right.
I can. I mean, it's a living.
But I mean, briefly part.
Yeah, I would say it's ranching in nature's image, right?
Okay.
Like I think the industrial, huge scale agriculture model is basically we humans trying to mechanize and do war in some way with nature, right? Like we can do it better. We're gonna mechanically, chemically alter the ecosystem and extract the most resource possible. And I think over the decades we're starting to see the impact of that play out. And I think regenerative, put simply, is ranching in an 1800s style of ranching. Right? Like the human input is a lot higher. It requires more people moving the animals and fencing more often, but it requires a lot less mechanical and chemical inputs. And so you're really just ranching with nature. The comparison I draw very simply a lot is, historically there would have been 40 to 60 million bison roaming the continent of North America. And by instinct, these animals are herd animals. They live in close quarters to each other, and they're constantly moving. They're moving in search of greener pasture, and they're also moving because predators are pushing them. And so, they densely graze areas, and then there's long periods of rest. So that grass is grazed down, they manure, they pee, they wallow, and then they move on. And what's most important is that rest period, right? So you get the recovery. And it's just like fitness, it's like a lot of things in life. Like the recovery is what's most important. And in conventional livestock management, recovery is kind of overlooked. And in regenerative livestock management, you're doing exactly that natural cycle of dense herds moving constantly, just at smaller scale, and humans are responsible for moving them.
Yeah. I've been fascinated as I've learned more about regenerative agriculture. My wife and I have been nerding out on it a little bit because hopes and dreams for our next property purchase is going to involve cows and probably some kind of regenerative practices in managing that at a small scale. Not one of the ranches you guys buy from, but 20 cows kind of scale. And it's been really interesting to learn, and you learn a lot about our creator. You learn a lot about, oh wow, all this genetically modified things that we're doing in agriculture are changing so many things on a molecular level in our bodies and how it impacts us, and changing, you look at how it impacts your blood tests, looks at how it impacts your hormone levels, how it impacts all these different things, and you're like, wow, that all comes back to what we're putting into our bodies. And that's wild.
Yeah, I think one of the things I really like about regenerative agriculture is it's just an ecosystem mindset. And most forms of production, like they're simply concerned about the output in the crop yield that they're producing.
Dollars and cents.
Whether it's cattle or grain or feed or whatever it is. And yes, that is still the goal of a regenerative system, is the output. Like businesses have to make money. That's a fundamental principle. But at the end of the day, like the metrics to get there are a lot different. Right? You're testing soil. You're looking at organic matter in the soil. Capability to hold water. You're looking at insect life, you're looking at bird life, because you're trying to get a healthy ecosystem to produce a healthy animal, not just laser focused on this one output. And I think when you do that, it creates this ecosystem that's just healthy, it's alive, it's sustainable, and it's better for all of the stakeholders. And to me, like all the stakeholders are not just the consumer and the rancher, it's the animal, it's the land, it's the future sustainability from a business perspective of that piece of property, which I think is hugely overlooked in agriculture, right? Like chemically and mechanically extracting year after year, like you're going to leave your grandkid with nothing left to chemically and mechanically extract.
The longevity, from what I see, of regenerative farming is huge. I mean, at the end of the day, when we talk about like supply chains and how we saw our world come to a halt, just a month ago, when it froze, we still have these supply chain shortages where things couldn't come down the I-5. And if you're relying on your farming to be chemically enhanced or these other inputs, what happens when that goes away? Well, then the product can't come to the table, as opposed to what I see from the outside. The regenerative side is, like you said, a much higher human input, but ideally we'll be here. And going back to that kind of 1800s method seems like it makes a lot of sense on longevity.
Yeah, the human input too is really important to touch on, because one of the things that makes me the most proud about what we do as a company at Force of Nature is like we have the rancher's best interest in mind. And like the idea of having more human input and employing more people to work on the ranch and work with animals, I think that's a really fulfilling lifestyle. That if you went to a lot of people who are struggling with mental health or just with finding purpose in their life and said, hey, we can provide you a lifestyle to provide for your family, you can make a good income, you can live a life where your kids can grow up with nature and interact with animals, and you know, we can do more of that, create more of those jobs for people. In this day and age where everything is being replaced by technology, to kind of find an industry that can potentially send it back the other way and rely on humans to do something, I think is really cool. And it's very inspiring to me.
Yeah. No, I hadn't really thought about it that way, in how everything else is switching the opposite direction to be able to take it.
Well, I look, as you say that, I'm picturing my wife, the things that she has gotten passionate about in the last 6 to 18 months. And a lot of it's been through learning more about health stuff and the motivations that come from that. But, you know, just in our life, you know, she's taking and she's making bread from einkorn because of the benefits of, you know, she's gluten intolerant, but she can eat homemade bread made with einkorn, and it's that natural in its most original state. You know, we have a couple of cows now that we're, you know, doing organic practices with. We got chickens that are grass-fed, pasture-raised chickens, both for eggs and for meat, and then all these other things that we're doing. And it's her passion project. She loves it. It gives her worth. It gives her something to work on. She's learning about it. You know, yes, it's a little stressful raising kids and trying to accomplish all those things with me having all the commitments I have in life as well, but it's still given her a wonderful outlet. And I think
that sense of worth, man, how valuable is that?
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
you can't even put dollars on that.
No, you can't. And it all tastes way better anyway as well. There's that minor detail, like our chickens that we pull out of the freezer, the ones we raised, like when we first went through the butchering process, so we butchered 51 chickens in one day. That was a little more work than I was expecting. And I was supposed to teach at church the next day, so my poor wife got stuck with like the 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. shift or whatever it ended up being, finishing out, because I'm like, I gotta teach tomorrow. Like I gotta get some amount of sleep tonight. But when we finished the butchering process, we're like, oh my goodness, I don't know if this is worth ever doing again. Store-bought chicken, you know, maybe. And then we started eating it. And within a week, we're like, okay, just kidding. We'll figure out what it's going to take to, you know, do more chicken tractors and spread it out differently and do different things so that we can keep doing this. You know, we've been spoiled because we've had good connections for pasture-raised beef for a long time, and between that and elk and deer and other stuff, like we were pretty used to eating, you know, red meat that was pretty organic, or at its most organic. But the chicken thing blew me away, and I'm like, all right, well, what else is out there that I'm overlooking and not thinking about, you know? And of course, she's got a big garden and different things. Anyway, I'm rambling. But what you just said about giving worth and energizing and you know, is playing out in front of me. As you said that, I'm watching it play out. I'm like, that is so true. So anyway, well, welcome to Southern Oregon.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
A lot of credit to you guys for getting us here in the right way. And I mean, we definitely stretched our comfort zone to make it happen, but we did it in such a way that we felt like we were being led to do it, and we feel comfortable and confident, you know, leaning into. And I think Alex and I talked a lot about this, but like we felt like we were buying our forever place a lot earlier in life than a lot of people do, but like we were intentionally doing that with the idea that like, okay, we now know what our expenses are going to be, right? And we're locked into this. It's not like it's going to go up because we're going to have to buy this place in 10 years. It's like we know, and we can build our life to support like a known quantity now. Whereas before I was like always trying to squirrel away like my ranch fund, right? Like it was like this unknown thing of like, I don't know how much I got to save. I don't know what's going to happen. But, and then just like the story of how we got here from meeting you guys to like all of the indescribable things that just, one, made it obvious that like this is where we were being led. Like we really felt like God was opening a door for us. But like the specifics of like the things that happen, like the finances in our life, the people that were willing to come to the table to help us. And I mean, even just, I mean, we own a coffee business, Wild Rivers Coffee, and we had, you know, a number of investors approach us over the years, but, you know, I'd always kind of been uninterested. And then last year, even before we got under contract, this couple came into our life who was just a fit. And they, you know, aligned values, 2 girls the same age as our girls, like sit on the board for BHA. I'm like, who are you? Are you like a fake person? That's like been in this life to try and convince me to do something. And like,
BlackRock created their social profile.
yeah. But we met them, and then we ended up doing this deal with them to come on as investors and co-owners in this business with us, and that partly, you know, helped us fund, you know, down payment on the property. And it's just like all of these things that came together that were just beyond us.
That's so cool.
And it's just, we feel so blessed by it all, and just blessed to have, you know, good people in our life already this early in a new place to lean in with.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Well, thank you for joining us on part 1.
Yeah.
Hopefully there's a part 2 soon.
At destination.
At destination.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I got a little shooting range set up that Alex brought his son out to the other day. We could go sit there and plink away a little bit. And
run some drills, like hone some skills.
Yeah.
Sorry. Well, appreciate it. And thank you for joining us on this episode of the Land and Blast podcast. I've missed Sam. I still struggle to get that whole introduction host thing down. Anyway, thank you guys.